Hey there, welcome back to another relaxing session of Reddit drama, while we explore this cozy Minecraft world together. There's something oddly satisfying about watching someone's perfectly planned deception completely unravel when they least expect it. The carefully constructed lies, the manipulation, the confidence that they'd never be caught, all collapsing like a house of cards. And let's be honest, sometimes the best part is watching karma show up right on schedule. These stories remind us that while truth can be temporarily hidden, it rarely stays buried forever. The satisfaction of seeing justice served, especially when someone thought they were untouchable, hits differently when you're building your own little sanctuary in this blocky universe. Before we get started, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been watching and leaving feedback in the comments. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts and let me know you're enjoying this kind of content. It's starting to feel like we're building a little community here. I'll keep doing my best to help you relax and unwind as we explore some of the wildest Reddit drama on the internet. Today we've got 12 absolutely wild stories of secrets exposed, betrayals uncovered, and the sweetest revenge served ice cold. From wedding photographers capturing more than just happy memories to chance encounters that change lives forever, you won't believe how these situations escalate. So grab your favorite snack, keep building that amazing base, and let's dive into our first story about a wedding photographer who accidentally captured something they were never meant to see. Amy and I have been best friends since middle school. We've been through everything together: bad breakups, college stress, career changes. So when she asked me to be her wedding photographer, I was honored. I'm not a professional, but I've always had a good eye and a decent camera, and Amy trusted me to capture her special day. "You're the only one who knows exactly what moments matter to me," she said. "Plus, we'll save a fortune on photography fees." The ceremony was beautiful. Amy looked radiant in her lace gown, and Mark, her boyfriend of 3 years, couldn't take his eyes off her. I captured every tender moment: their first kiss as husband and wife, their dance under the fairy lights, the cake cutting. Everyone commented on what a perfect couple they made. The reception was in full swing when I noticed something odd. I was reviewing some shots on my camera when I spotted Mark in the background of one photo, slipping through a door that led to the venue's storage rooms. Nothing suspicious about that. Maybe he needed a break from all the noise and celebration. But what caught my attention was that Amy's mother, Diane, followed him less than a minute later. Diane had always been interesting. She was the type of woman who dressed 20 years younger than her age and flirted with everyone, including her daughter's boyfriends. Amy often joked about how embarrassing it was, but I'd always sensed a deeper hurt there. I decided to follow them, telling myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe they were retrieving a surprise gift for Amy or discussing some family matter. I positioned myself near the storage area, pretending to take atmospheric shots of the venue while actually angling my camera toward the hallway. When they emerged about 15 minutes later, Diane's lipstick was smudged and Mark was adjusting his tie. They walked out separately, but their body language screamed guilt. My stomach knotted, but I still wasn't sure what I'd witnessed. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe I was reading too much into it. That night, after everyone had gone home, I uploaded the photos to my laptop. Most were beautiful memories of a perfect day. But then I found it, a series of shots taken near the storage area. In one clear image, partially visible through a door left ajar, was Mark pressing Amy's mother against the wall. Their lips locked in a passionate kiss. I felt physically sick. I zoomed in, hoping I was mistaken, but there was no doubt. The timestamp showed it happened right after the father-daughter dance. While Amy was mingling with guests, her new husband was making out with her mother. This is where things get truly twisted. The more I looked through my photos, the more I noticed small interactions between Mark and Diane throughout the day. Lingering glances, subtle touches, private smiles. How had no one else seen this? I barely slept that night. What was I supposed to do? Tell my best friend that her husband had cheated on her with her own mother on their wedding day? Keep the secret and let her live in blissful ignorance? Neither option seemed right. For the next week, while Amy and Mark were honeymooning in Bali, I agonized over my decision. I spoke to my boyfriend about it without showing him the photos. You have to tell her, he said firmly. If Mark did this on their wedding day, imagine what he'll do during their marriage. He was right, but knowing something is right doesn't make it any easier. When Amy returned, suntanned and happy, I asked if I could come over to show her the wedding photos. She was excited, eager to relive her perfect day. These are beautiful, she kept saying as we scrolled through them on my laptop. You captured everything so perfectly. Then we reached those photos. I paused, my finger hovering over the keyboard. Amy, there's something I need to show you, and it's going to hurt. Her smile faded as I clicked through the damning sequence of images. At first she was confused, then disbelieving, then completely shattered. She stared at the screen, her hands shaking. This can't be real, she whispered. Tell me you photoshopped this. Tell me this is some sick joke. But we both knew it wasn't. The evidence was irrefutable. Amy's reaction shifted from devastation to white-hot fury in seconds. She grabbed her phone and called Mark, who was at work. Get home now, was all she said before hanging up. Then she called her mother. You need to come over immediately. I offered to leave, but Amy clutched my arm. Stay, please. I need someone who's actually on my side. What followed was the most explosive confrontation I've ever witnessed. When Mark arrived, he initially tried to play dumb, but faced with the photographic evidence, his defense crumbled. It was a mistake, he pleaded, a one-time thing. I was drunk, and on our wedding day, Amy screamed, with my mother. When Diane arrived 30 minutes later, the situation escalated further. Unlike Mark, she didn't bother denying anything. We didn't plan for it to happen, she said, her voice eerily calm. These things just develop. That's when Amy lost it completely. Develop? Develop? How long has this been going on? The truth came pouring out. The affair had been ongoing for months. It started when Mark went to ask Diane's advice about engagement rings. One thing led to another, and they'd been meeting secretly ever since. The absolute kicker. They'd continued seeing each other during the wedding planning, right under Amy's nose. Some of their planning meetings had actually been rendezvous at a hotel downtown. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process the level of betrayal. It wasn't just the physical cheating. It was the months of lies, the manipulation, the utter disrespect for Amy and her feelings. These were the two people who were supposed to love her most in the world. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Amy's father walked in. He'd come to drop off some gifts from the wedding and walked into World War III. Seeing the photos, hearing the shouting, it didn't take him long to piece together what had happened. What he said next stunned all of us. I knew you were cheating, he said quietly to Diane. I've known for years, but with our daughter's husband? How could you? The room went silent. Amy looked at her father in disbelief. You knew, and you didn't say anything? I stayed for you, Amy, he replied, his voice breaking. I didn't want to break up our family, but this is unforgivable. In that moment, an entire family imploded. Years of secrets, resentments, and betrayals all surfaced at once. Amy's parents started arguing about their own failed marriage, completely forgetting about the situation at hand. Mark sat there looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Amy turned to me, tears streaming down her face. Get me out of here, she whispered. I drove her to my apartment where she collapsed on my couch and cried until she had no tears left. Over the next few days, she made some hard decisions. She filed for an annulment, citing fraud. She cut off contact with her mother completely. She moved out of the home she'd shared with Mark and temporarily stayed with me. The fallout continued for months. Amy's parents separated after 30 years of marriage. Mark tried repeatedly to win Amy back, sending flowers, letters, even showing up at her workplace. Amy's mother alternated between defensive justification and desperate apologies. The extended family took sides, with most rallying around Amy, but some inexplicably defending Mark and Diane. Through it all, I tried to be there for Amy. Some nights she'd rage about the betrayal. Other nights she'd question whether she was overreacting. Sometimes she'd wonder aloud if she could have done something differently, if she had somehow pushed Mark away. Those were the hardest conversations, watching my friend blame herself for other people's inexcusable behavior. Almost exactly a year after the wedding, Amy and I went out for dinner. She looked better than she had in months. She'd started therapy, changed jobs, even gone on a few dates. Over dessert, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she said simply, "for telling me the truth when it would have been easier to keep quiet. You saved me from years of lies." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "I was afraid of hurting you." "The truth hurt," she acknowledged, "but living a lie would have been worse. I'm rebuilding now, on solid ground, and I know who's really in my corner." That night, scrolling through social media, I saw that Mark and Diane had both moved to different states, separately. Amy's father had started dating again and looked happier than I'd seen him in years. And Amy herself had posted a simple status: "Sometimes the truth hurts before it heals." I closed my laptop and thought about how one moment, catching that photograph, had changed so many lives. As a photographer, you expect to preserve memories, not destroy them. But sometimes destruction is necessary for rebuilding something better. Speaking of shocking family revelations, wait until you hear about the Uber driver who didn't realize he was picking up the child he abandoned 20 years earlier. It was almost midnight when my shift at the hospital finally ended. I'm a nurse in the emergency department, and we'd been slammed all day with everything from car accidents to a guy who'd somehow managed to superglue his hand to his face. I was exhausted, my feet were killing me, and all I wanted was to get home and collapse into bed. I pulled out my phone and ordered an Uber. The app showed a driver named Richard would arrive in 3 minutes driving a blue Honda Civic. Right on time, the car pulled up, and I climbed into the back seat. "Long day?" Richard asked as I buckled my seatbelt. He was probably in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and a friendly smile visible in the rearview mirror. "The longest," I replied, expecting that to be the end of our conversation. Most Uber drivers in the city get the hint when you're too tired to chat. Not Richard. He was unusually talkative, asking about my job, commenting on the weather, discussing a new restaurant that had opened downtown. Normally, I'd find it annoying, but there was something disarming about him. He had this warm, familiar energy that made me feel comfortable enough to engage. "So, have you always lived in the city?" he asked after a few minutes. "No, I grew up in a small town called Millfield in Ohio. Moved here for nursing school 5 years ago and just stayed." His reaction was strange. He went completely silent mid-sentence, his hands tensing on the steering wheel. In the mirror, I could see his expression had changed, like he'd seen a ghost. "Millfield," he finally said, his voice different now. That's quite a coincidence. I spent some time there years ago." Then came the questions, not just casual conversation anymore, but specific inquiries. Did I know the Johnson family who owned the hardware store? Was the high school still on Maple Street? Did the town still hold the summer festival in the park? As we approached my apartment complex, his questions got even more personal. "Do you mind if I ask who your family is in Millfield? I knew quite a few people there. Just my mum, really, Sarah Williams. My grandparents passed away years ago." What happened next still feels surreal when I think about it. Richard's face went completely pale. The car swerved sharply and he slammed on the brakes, pulling over to the curb so abruptly that I lurched forward against my seatbelt. "Are you okay?" I asked, genuinely concerned he was having some kind of medical emergency. He didn't answer. Instead, he put the car in park, unbuckled his seatbelt, and turned around to face me completely. For the first time, I really looked at him. His eyes, his jawline, the way his left eyebrow arched slightly higher than his right, just like mine. "Your mother is Sarah Williams," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And you're Emily," I supplied, a strange sensation spreading through my chest. "Emily Williams." "Emily," he repeated like he was testing out the name. "You were born in March 17th. It wasn't a question. "How do you know that?" I demanded, suddenly feeling vulnerable. He took a deep breath, his hands shaking visibly now. "Because I think I'm your father." You know those moments in movies where there's a dramatic revelation and everything goes quiet except for a high-pitched ringing? That's exactly what happened. The street noise faded away, and all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My father, my absent, never mentioned, disappeared before I could remember. Him father. My first instinct was disbelief, then anger. Was this some kind of sick joke? Had he somehow planned this? Was he stalking me? "That's not funny," I said coldly. "My father left when I was 2. I don't even remember what he looks like." "Richard Dawson," he said quietly. Is my name. I met your mother at Ohio State in 1998. We got married in 2000, had you in 2002, and I left in 2004. The specific details made my stomach drop. Those were facts only my real father would know. If you're really him, why would you just happen to be my Uber driver? In a completely different state? 20 years later? The odds are astronomical. He laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "I've been driving for Uber for 3 years in this city. I've probably given hundreds, maybe thousands of rides. I never thought." And that's when it hit me. The pure statistical improbability of it all. He wasn't lying. He wasn't stalking me. This was just one of those one-in-a-million coincidences that change everything. I stared at him, really looking now. The resemblance was undeniable. We had the same eyes, the same chin, even the same way of gesturing when we spoke. I'd always assumed I looked like my mother. But sitting there face to face with Richard, I could see myself in him so clearly, it was almost frightening. "Why did you leave?" The question came out small, childlike. He looked down at his hands. "It's complicated. Your mother and we had problems. I made mistakes, serious ones. After a particularly bad fight, she told me to leave and never come back. Said you'd both be better off without me. And you just went? Never tried to contact us? Never sent child support? Never wondered how I was doing?" Richard's eyes filled with tears. "I did try at first, but your mother had changed her number, moved to a new address. This was before social media, before you could just look someone up online. And I wasn't in a good place. I had a drinking problem back then. Drug issues too. That was when everything became too much. 20 years of wondering, of creating stories in my head about who my father might be, all culminating in this bizarre twist of fate in an Uber car at midnight. "I need to process this," I said, reaching for the door handle. "This is too much." "Wait," Richard said desperately. Can we exchange numbers? I understand if you need time, but please don't disappear." The irony of him asking me not to disappear wasn't lost on me. Still, I found myself pulling out my phone, creating a new contact and handing it to him. He entered his information with shaking hands. "I'll text you," I said, not knowing if I actually would. "But I need time." "Of course," he nodded, wiping his eyes quickly. "Whatever you need." I got out of the car and watched him drive away, my mind spinning. I didn't sleep at all that night. For a week, I did nothing. I told no one, Not even my best friend. I just carried this enormous secret while trying to function normally. Then, almost without deciding to, I called my mother. Our relationship had always been close but complicated. She'd raised me alone, working multiple jobs, always supporting my dreams. But the topic of my father had been strictly off limits my entire life. "Mum," I said when she answered, "I need to talk to you about something important." "You sound serious." "Honey, everything okay?" I met Dad. The silence that followed was deafening. "What do you mean?" she finally asked, her voice tight. I explained the incredible coincidence, the Uber ride, the conversation. "His name is Richard Dawson, right?" Another long pause. "Yes," she admitted. "That's him." And here's where everything took another turn. After 20 years of silence on the subject, my mother finally opened up. Yes, Richard had been an addict. Yes, they'd had a volatile relationship. But there was more to the story than he'd told me. I didn't just tell him to leave after an argument, Emily. He showed up at our house high with people I didn't know. You were asleep upstairs. I was terrified they might hurt you, or that you'd see your father like that. I told him he couldn't be in your life unless he got clean. And he never did. He tried several times. He'd get sober for a few months, then relapse. After the third time, I couldn't do it anymore. I changed our number, moved us to your grandparents' house. I thought a clean break would be better than watching him destroy himself. That wasn't the story Richard had told me, but it wasn't entirely different either. Just two different perspectives on the same painful past. He says he's been sober for 8 years now, I told her. "I hope that's true," my mother said softly, "for his sake and yours." 2 days later, I texted Richard and suggested we meet at a coffee shop. I also suggested we do a DNA test, just to be absolutely certain. He agreed immediately to both. Our first real conversation was awkward, stilted. We were strangers with the same face, trying to navigate an impossible situation. He showed me photos he'd kept of me as a baby, told me about his journey to sobriety, his current job as a high school math teacher. Uber was just a side gig for extra money. I told him about nursing school, my friends, my life. The DNA test results came back 3 weeks later, confirming what we already knew: 99.9% probability of paternity. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. This family reunion is just getting started. That was 6 months ago. Since then, Richard and I have been cautiously building a relationship. We meet for coffee every other week. He came to my hospital's charity run to cheer me on. I helped him pick out a birthday present for his girlfriend of 3 years, a kindergarten teacher named Melissa. It's complicated and messy, and nothing like the perfect reunion scenes in movies. We're both still figuring out what we want this relationship to be. My mother and Richard have spoken briefly on the phone, but haven't met in person yet. Last week, Richard showed me the 1-year sobriety chip he earned all those years ago, the one he carried through 7 subsequent relapses before finally achieving lasting recovery. I kept this to remind myself that success was possible, even when it seemed impossible, he told me. Maybe that's what this unexpected second chance is. A reminder that connections can be rebuilt, even when they seem irreparably broken. I don't know if Richard and I will ever have a traditional father-daughter relationship. Too much time has passed, too much history missed, but sometimes life gives you second chances when you least expect them. And sometimes those chances come in the form of an Uber ride after a long shift, when all the stars align to rewrite a story you thought was finished long ago. You think that family drama was intense. Just wait until you hear about the sister who stole an inheritance and the screenshot that destroyed her perfect engagement. My grandfather was a classic car enthusiast his entire life. He spent decades hunting down rare models, restoring them with his own hands, and caring for them like they were his children. His garage was my favorite place growing up. The smell of motor oil and leather, the gleaming chrome, the stories behind each vehicle. While my sister Vanessa was off at dance recitals or shopping with our mum, I was in that garage with Grandpa, learning how to change oil and replace spark plugs. "These cars tell stories, son," he'd say, running his hand along a fender. "Each one has a soul, a history. When I'm gone, they'll need someone who understands that." When Grandpa died last year, I was devastated. He wasn't just my grandfather, he was my mentor, my friend. The funeral was brutal, seeing that strong, vibrant man reduced to ashes and memories. But I took comfort in knowing his passion would live on through me. The reading of the will was straightforward. Grandma would get the house and most of his savings. Various family members received small keepsakes. And to me, he left his entire car collection, 7 meticulously maintained classics worth approximately $200,000 in total. It wasn't just about the money, it was about preserving his legacy. Vanessa didn't take it well. "Why would he leave them to you?" she demanded after the lawyer finished. "I was his favorite. Everyone knows that." It was true that Grandpa had always showered her with affection and gifts. She was the first grandchild, the only granddaughter, and she knew exactly how to wrap him around her finger with a smile or a tear. But when it came to the cars, he and I had a connection she couldn't touch. "He knew I would take care of them," I said simply. She stormed out, and I didn't think much of it. Vanessa had always been dramatic. I figured she'd cool off eventually. 2 weeks later, I had to leave for a 6-month work assignment in Singapore. It was terrible timing, but I couldn't turn it down without jeopardizing my career. I spoke with Grandma about storing the cars in Grandpa's garage until I returned, and she agreed. Everything seemed settled. While overseas, I checked in regularly with Grandma, but she became increasingly evasive about the cars. "We can discuss it when you're home," she'd say, changing the subject. I started to worry, but told myself I was being paranoid. I wasn't. When I returned 6 months later, the garage was empty. All 7 cars gone. When I confronted my grandmother, she broke down crying. "Vanessa came to me right after you left," she sobbed. "She said your grandfather had verbally promised the cars to her before he died, that he'd changed his mind about the will, but didn't have time to update it. She said he wanted her to have them because you were planning to sell them immediately." My blood ran cold. "And you believed her?" She had tears in her eyes, swore on her life, said you didn't really care about the cars, just the money. I was still so grief-stricken, not thinking clearly. She brought papers for me to sign as executrix, authorizing the transfer. That's when it hit me. You signed over my inheritance to her without even calling to ask me? Grandma couldn't look me in the eye. I thought I was honoring your grandfather's final wishes. I was speechless with rage and betrayal, not just at Vanessa, but at my grandmother for being so easily manipulated. When I could finally speak again, I asked, "Where are the cars now? I need to get them back." "They're gone," Grandma whispered. "Vanessa sold them all within weeks. To collectors, I think." The room seemed to tilt around me, my grandfather's beloved cars, scattered to the winds, the collection he'd spent his life building, dismantled in less than a month by someone who saw them only as dollar signs. "What did she do with the money?" I managed to ask. "She and Jason put it toward a down payment on a luxury condo downtown. They moved in last month." Jason was Vanessa's fiancé of 2 years. They'd been planning an extravagant wedding, scheduled for later that summer. A wedding I was now certain would be partially funded by my stolen inheritance. I tried to pursue legal action, but it was complicated. Grandma had signed the transfer papers as the executrix of the estate. Vanessa had immediately sold the cars to third parties across the country. The money was now tied up in real estate. My lawyer wasn't optimistic about recovery. I was about to give up when luck intervened. My cousin Megan, who had always been closer to me than to Vanessa, called me out of the blue. "You need to see something," she said. "Vanessa's been shooting her mouth off to friends about how she got those cars from you." Megan forwarded me screenshots of a text conversation between Vanessa and her best friend Tiffany from 7 months ago, right after I'd left for Singapore. "Operation Car Heist. Success," Vanessa had written. "Grandpa always loved me more, but left everything to my brother. No worries, I convinced Grandma I deserved it instead. Too easy. Tiffany. OMG, she actually believed you." "What about the will?" Vanessa. "Told her Grandpa changed his mind before dying but didn't update the will. Cried a little. Works every time. Now we have the down payment for the dream condo." Tiffany. "But won't your brother be super pissed when he gets back?" Vanessa. "What's he gonna do? Cars are sold, money's spent. Besides, he's always been Grandma's least favorite. No one will take his side." I read those messages a dozen times, my hands shaking with anger. This wasn't just opportunism, it was premeditated theft. She'd planned it all, manipulated our grieving grandmother, and bragged about it afterward. And that final line, assuming no one would take my side, that cut the deepest. I debated what to do with this evidence. I could take it to my lawyer, but the legal process would be slow, expensive, and might still not recover anything. I wanted more immediate justice. Then I remembered Vanessa and Jason's engagement party was scheduled for that weekend. All her friends, his family, our relatives, everyone would be there to celebrate their perfect relationship and upcoming wedding. The same relationship funded by her theft and deception. I didn't RSVP. Instead, I waited until the party was in full swing, according to the social media posts Megan was sending me. Then I found Jason's number and forwarded him the entire screenshot exchange with one simple message. "Thought you should know what kind of person you're marrying. This is how she funded your condo down payment." 20 minutes later, Megan called me, breathless with drama. "Oh my God, you will not believe what just happened," she gasped. Jason stood up in the middle of the party, white as a ghost, and asked if he could talk to Vanessa privately. She thought he was going to make some romantic speech, so she said, "Anything you want to say to me, you can say in front of everyone here." I could picture it perfectly. Vanessa in some expensive dress, champagne in hand, loving being the center of attention. So Jason just held up his phone with those texts on the screen and said, "Is this true? Did you steal from your brother and lie to your grandmother to pay for our condo?" Megan continued. The whole place went dead silent. Vanessa tried to deny it, then tried to justify it, then tried to blame you for never appreciating Grandpa. But Jason wasn't having it. He said he couldn't marry someone capable of stealing from their own family. Threw the engagement ring on the table and walked out. Justice doesn't always arrive on schedule, but when it does, it can be spectacular. The fallout was immediate and messy. Jason broke the engagement and demanded Vanessa buy out his portion of the condo or sell it. My grandmother, horrified by the evidence of Vanessa's manipulation, amended her will to exclude my sister entirely. Various family members took sides. Some thought I'd gone too far by humiliating Vanessa publicly, while others felt she'd gotten exactly what she deserved. Vanessa herself alternated between furious tirades and tearful apologies, depending on which approach she thought might work. But the damage was done. The screenshot had revealed who she truly was, not just to me, but to everyone who mattered to her. "You've ruined my life," she sobbed during one confrontation, "all over some stupid cars." "They weren't just cars to Grandpa," I replied, "and this isn't about the cars anymore. It's about who you chose to be." She couldn't sell the condo in the current market without taking a loss, and she couldn't afford to buy out Jason's share. Last I heard, she had to take out a personal loan and move to a much smaller apartment. She's still single, still blaming me for exposing her rather than accepting responsibility for her actions. Do I regret sending those screenshots? Not for a second. The cars are gone forever, and I'll never get that part of my inheritance back. But in their place, I received something possibly more valuable, the truth about my sister, clear and undeniable, not just for me, but for everyone who knew her. Sometimes justice doesn't look like what you expected. Sometimes it's not about getting back what was taken, but about ensuring the person who took it can never do it again. As for my relationship with Vanessa, well, some broken things can't be restored, but at least now we're both operating in reality, not the fiction she spent years constructing. If you thought that betrayal was cold-blooded, wait until you hear about the boss who fired me right before my wedding, not knowing I had evidence that would expose his entire career as a fraud. I always prided myself on being a model employee. 3 years at Westfield Financial, and I'd never missed a deadline, always exceeded my targets, and even volunteered for those thankless projects nobody wanted. My performance reviews were stellar. Exceptional potential, management material, invaluable team member. That's why what happened next blindsided me so completely. It started when I noticed some irregularities in our department's expense reports. As a senior financial analyst, part of my job was reviewing quarterly budgets, and something didn't add up. Our department head, Mark Donovan, had been submitting expense reports with vague descriptions like client development and research materials, totaling nearly $30,000 in the last quarter alone. I didn't want to make accusations without evidence, so I carefully documented the patterns and discrepancies. When I felt confident in my findings, I requested a private meeting with Mark. I've noticed some unusual spending patterns in our quarterly reports, I explained, sliding the folder across his desk. I thought you should know before the executive review next month. I expected gratitude, or at least professional concern. Instead, Mark's face hardened as he flipped through my analysis. "This is what you've been spending your time on?" he asked coldly, "instead of the Peterson account?" "The Peterson account is ahead of schedule," I replied, confused by his reaction. "I just thought—" "You thought you'd police my spending?" He closed the folder with a snap. "This is above your pay grade. I'll take it from here." The meeting ended abruptly, and I left feeling uneasy. Still, I assumed Mark would address the issues before the executive review. That's what any reasonable manager would do, right? 2 days later, I was called into HR. Mark sat there with a folder of his own, supposedly filled with documentation of my performance issues. According to him, I'd been missing deadlines, producing substandard work, and creating a negative atmosphere in the department. "We're going to have to let you go, effective immediately," the HR representative said, not quite meeting my eyes. I was stunned. "These claims are completely false. My performance reviews—" "Recent performance is what matters," Mark interrupted. "We'll provide 2 weeks severance, but we need your badge and company property now." Just like that, after 3 years of dedication, I was escorted out of the building like a criminal. No chance to say goodbye to colleagues, no opportunity to defend myself, just a cardboard box with my desk plant and family photos. And here's where it gets truly messed up. All this happened exactly 2 weeks before my wedding. My fiancé and I had already stretched our budget to the limit with venue deposits and vendor payments. We'd been counting on my year-end bonus to help cover the final expenses. Now, not only was the bonus gone, but so was my entire income. That evening, as I broke the news to my fiancé, the shock gave way to a simmering rage. This wasn't just unfair, it was deliberately vindictive. Mark hadn't just fired me, he'd timed it to cause maximum damage to my personal life. "He's covering something up," my fiancé said as we discussed the expense reports. "No one reacts like that unless they're hiding something." She was right. Mark's reaction had been too extreme, too defensive. He'd fabricated an entire case against me just to get rid of someone who'd noticed his financial irregularities. But what could I do? It would be my word against his, and he had the entire HR department backing his version of events. I spent the next day updating my resume and LinkedIn profile, reaching out to contacts and applying for new positions. The wedding was still happening. We'd eat the cost somehow, but I needed to find work fast. While browsing LinkedIn for connections, I pulled up Mark's profile for contact information of mutual connections. That's when I noticed something odd in his education section. Harvard Business School, MBA, 2007-2009. I'd never questioned Mark's credentials before. He certainly acted the part of the Harvard MBA, name-dropping professors, wearing the alumni tie, even keeping a Harvard diploma prominently displayed in his office. But something about those specific years nagged at me. My cousin had attended Harvard during that period for her undergraduate degree, and I vaguely remembered her mentioning something about campus renovations. On a hunch, I called her. "The business school," she said when I asked. "Oh yeah, their main building was closed for major renovations during the 2008-2009 academic year. They had to relocate a bunch of classes. It was a whole thing." Interesting. Not definitive, but interesting enough to dig deeper. I spent the next day researching Harvard Business School's history, finding newspaper articles about the renovation, and even locating old academic calendars online. The more I looked, the more suspicious Mark's claimed degree became. The business school had indeed maintained operations during renovations, but with a reduced class size and modified program. Something still felt off. Then I remembered that Harvard, like most universities, has a degree verification service through their registrar's office. For a small fee, anyone can confirm whether someone received a degree, what year, and in what field of study. It's typically used by employers during background checks. I paid the $15 verification fee, submitted Mark's full name and claimed graduation year, and waited. 3 days later, I received the response. No record of degree for individual named Mark Andrew Donovan during specified years. No record of enrollment at Harvard Business School for this individual. My heart raced as I read it again. Mark had never attended Harvard. His entire prestigious MBA, the qualification that had undoubtedly helped him secure his $300,000 salary and corner office, was completely fabricated. That's when everything unraveled. Further investigation revealed that Mark had never attended any MBA program. His only degree was a bachelor's in communications from a small state college. He'd been living a lie for his entire professional career, at least 15 years of fraudulent credentials. The pieces suddenly fit together. Mark's extreme reaction to my questions about expenses wasn't just about potential embezzlement. It was fear that any scrutiny might eventually expose his larger deception. I represented a threat to the carefully constructed facade he'd maintained for years. I considered my options. I could report this to HR, but given how they'd handled my termination, I wasn't confident they'd take me seriously. I could contact individual executives, but Mark had likely poisoned the well against me already. No, this called for something more decisive. I compiled a comprehensive dossier. The degree verification results, screenshots of Mark's LinkedIn and company bio claiming the Harvard MBA, photos of the Harvard diploma on his office wall, documentation of the business school renovation during his claimed attendance years. I even found photos of Mark wearing a Harvard class ring in company publications. Then I created an anonymous email account and sent the entire package to every member of the executive team, the board of directors, and the head of HR. The subject line simply read, "Fraud at senior management level, evidence attached." In the body of the email, I wrote, "For 15 years, Mark Donovan has claimed to hold an MBA from Harvard Business School, 2007-2009. This credential was undoubtedly a significant factor in his hiring, promotions, and compensation. As the attached evidence conclusively proves, Mark never attended Harvard. His credentials are entirely fraudulent. I bring this to your attention not out of malice, but because I believe Westfield Financial deserves management with genuine qualifications and integrity." I sent the email on a Sunday night, then barely slept, wondering what Monday would bring. I didn't have to wonder long. By 10 a.m., my phone was ringing with a call from Westfield's chief operating officer, someone I'd only seen from afar at company meetings. "We've received some concerning information," she said carefully. "I understand you were recently terminated by Mark Donovan?" "Yes," I confirmed, keeping my voice neutral. "2 weeks ago. Would you be willing to come in for a meeting this afternoon? There have been developments." 4 hours later, I sat in the COO's office as she explained the situation. The company had verified the information in the anonymous email, which they strongly suspected came from me, though I neither confirmed nor denied this. They had confronted Mark that morning, and after initial denials, he had admitted to falsifying his credentials. He was terminated immediately, she said. "We're conducting a full audit of his department and expenses as well." She slid a folder across the desk to me. Inside was a formal letter rescinding my termination, offering reinstatement with a promotion to department head, Mark's former position, and a significant salary increase. There was also a check for back pay covering the 2 weeks I'd been gone, plus an additional reconciliation bonus. "We failed you," she said simply. "We should have investigated his claims about your performance instead of taking them at face value, and we should have verified his credentials 15 years ago. We're hoping you'll give us the chance to make this right." I accepted the offer. My first day back was surreal, walking into the office to see security and IT personnel boxing up Mark's personal items, removing his name from the door, and wiping his access from company systems. Several colleagues who had witnessed my unceremonious departure 2 weeks earlier stared in shock as I was escorted not out of the building, but up to the executive floor. By the end of the week, a company-wide email announced a new policy requiring verification of all educational credentials for current and future employees. The financial audit revealed that Mark had indeed been embezzling funds through his vague expense reports, nearly $200,000 over 3 years. My wedding went ahead as planned, significantly less stressful now that I had not only my job back, but a substantial promotion. During the reception, my new boss, the COO who had rehired me, pulled me aside. "I know it was you who sent that email," she said with a knowing smile. "That took courage and integrity. Those are exactly the qualities we need in leadership." I just smiled and thanked her for coming. Some things are better left unconfirmed. The irony isn't lost on me. Mark fired me to cover up his fraudulent behavior, and that very action led directly to his exposure. If he just addressed the expense issues professionally, or even found a less vindictive way to edge me out, he might still have his falsified career intact. Instead, his attempt to silence me became the catalyst for his downfall. I still have the Harvard verification letter framed in my new office, not displayed prominently, just tucked away on a shelf as a personal reminder that the truth has a way of surfacing, sometimes when you least expect it. Speaking of unexpected discoveries, imagine finding out your therapist, the person you trusted with your deepest secrets, was casually discussing them over coffee at Starbucks. Going through a divorce is hard enough, but when your husband leaves you for your sister, that's a special kind of hell I wouldn't wish on anyone. I spent months barely functioning, sleeping all day, crying all night, ignoring calls from worried friends. The betrayal cut so deep that I questioned everything about myself and my reality. My primary care doctor gently suggested therapy, and after some resistance, I finally made an appointment with Dr. Bennett, a well-respected psychologist specializing in trauma and betrayal. Her office was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture that immediately put me at ease. She herself had a calming presence, professional but approachable, with kind eyes and a voice that never seemed judgmental. "Healing isn't linear," she told me during our first session. "Some days will feel like progress, others like backsliding, but I promise you, with time and work, you'll find yourself again." For 6 months, I saw Dr. Bennett weekly. I shared things with her I'd never told another soul. how I'd walked in on them together in our bed, how my sister had smiled at me almost triumphantly, how my husband had the audacity to say, "This isn't how we wanted you to find out." I confessed my darkest thoughts, my occasional wishes that they would both just disappear, my crippling self-doubt about what I could have done differently. Dr. Bennett was my lifeline. In her office, I could fall apart completely and know she would help me gather the pieces. I trusted her completely. She knew more about my innermost feelings than anyone alive. Everything we discuss is completely confidential, she had assured me in our first session. This is a safe space. Nothing leaves this room. After months of therapy, I was finally starting to feel like a person again. I'd returned to work, reconnected with friends, even gone on a couple of casual dates. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it no longer dominated every waking moment. I credited Dr. Bennett with saving my life, in a very real sense. Then came that Saturday morning. I developed a weekend ritual of treating myself to an overpriced latte and a quiet hour of reading, small pleasures that helped me reclaim joy in my new solitary life. My usual Starbucks was crowded, so I decided to try one across town. As I waited in line, I spotted Dr. Bennett at a corner table with another woman about her age. My first instinct was to go over and say hello, maybe introduce myself as one of her clients without getting into specifics. But something held me back, a strange discomfort at seeing her in this context, outside the safety of her office. I got my coffee and found a table nearby, partially obscured by a decorative plant, but with a clear line of hearing. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping, I just hadn't decided yet whether to acknowledge her. Then I heard her laugh, a sharp, mocking sound I'd never heard in our sessions, followed by words that froze me in place. And she still blames herself. Can you believe it? Her husband and sister were having an affair for over a year, right under her nose, and somehow she thinks she could have prevented it if she'd been a better wife. My blood ran cold. She was talking about me, not just mentioning me vaguely, but sharing the most painful details of my life as casual coffee conversation. That's the one whose ex gave her that jewelry set for your birthday, then asked for it back to give to the sister, right? Her friend asked, leaning forward eagerly. Dr. Bennett nodded, still laughing. The same. Oh, and get this. Last session, she told me she's finally going on dates again, but she keeps comparing every man to her ex. I told her that's normal, but honestly, the bar is literally on the floor. Her ex was garbage, and she's still idealizing parts of their relationship. I felt physically ill, my hands shaking so badly I nearly spilled my coffee. This woman, this professional I had trusted with my most vulnerable secrets, was using my trauma as entertainment over brunch. Worse, she was sharing enough specific details that if anyone who knew me overheard, they could easily identify me. Without fully thinking it through, I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. I needed proof of what I was hearing, because part of me still couldn't believe it was happening. I pressed record and placed the phone on the table, angled toward their conversation. I have another client who found her husband's secret phone with explicit text to multiple women, Dr. Bennett was saying, clearly warmed up to her storytelling now. She showed up at my office unannounced, hysterical, needing an emergency session. Completely threw off my lunch plans. Her friend laughed. The nerve. Don't they know you have a life outside their problems? Exactly. I mean, I sympathize. But boundaries, people. That's when everything crystallized for me. Dr. Bennett didn't see me, or any of her clients, as people in pain deserving dignity and confidentiality. We were just entertaining stories to share over coffee, inconveniences when our crises didn't fit neatly into her schedule. I'd heard enough. I stopped the recording, picked up my things, and walked directly to their table. Dr. Bennett's expression when she saw me was almost comical. Eyes widening, face draining of color, coffee cup frozen halfway to her mouth. Dr. Bennett, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, given the adrenaline coursing through me. I couldn't help overhearing your conversation. I I don't know what you mean, she stammered, glancing nervously at her friend. Let me refresh your memory, I replied, pulling out my phone and playing back the recording. As her own voice filled the air between us, discussing my private therapy sessions, her expression shifted from shock to something close to panic. Her friend muttered something about needing to leave and hurriedly gathered her belongings, avoiding eye contact with either of us. When we were alone, Dr. Bennett attempted damage control. I'm so sorry you overheard that. It's not what it sounds like. I was just consulting with a colleague about some challenging cases. She's not your colleague, I interrupted. And that wasn't a consultation. That was gossip. About me. About my pain. About the most traumatic experience of my life. Please, let's not make a scene, she whispered, looking around nervously at nearby tables where people were beginning to notice our tense exchange. Come to my office on Monday, and we can discuss this professionally. Professionally? I repeated, incredulous. There was nothing professional about what just happened. You violated every ethical standard of your profession. You betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way possible. I made a mistake, she conceded, her voice dropping even lower. But please don't do anything rash. My practice. Your practice, I cut her off again. You're worried about your practice? I shared things with you I've never told another living soul. Things that keep me awake at night, and you turn them into cocktail party stories. I stood up, gathering my dignity around me like armor. The state licensing board will be receiving this recording along with a formal complaint. What happens to your practice after that is not my concern. As I walked away, she called after me, but I didn't look back. In my car, I finally allowed myself to break down, sobbing over this fresh betrayal. Just when I'd started to trust again, to heal, to believe in basic human decency, this happened. The next day, after researching the proper procedures, I filed a formal complaint with the State Psychology Licensing Board, including the recording as evidence. The process was intimidating. Detailed forms, notarized statements, a clinical retelling of what had happened, but also empowering. I was standing up for myself and potentially protecting future clients from similar violations. The investigation took nearly 3 months. During that time, I found a new therapist, a kind older man who specialized in trauma and, ironically, betrayal by helping professionals. In our first session, I explained what had happened with Dr. Bennett. Before we go any further, he said gravely, I want to assure you that what she did was a serious ethical violation, not a gray area or common practice. Most therapists hold confidentiality as sacred. What you experienced was the exception, not the rule. With his help, I began to process this new layer of betrayal, to understand that Dr. Bennett's actions reflected her failings, not mine. Meanwhile, the licensing board investigation revealed I wasn't alone. They found evidence she had discussed other clients inappropriately as well, both in person and on social media, sometimes using thinly veiled identifiers. 6 months after that fateful morning at Starbucks, I received official notification Dr. Bennett's psychology license had been suspended for 2 years. She would need to complete additional ethics training, undergo supervision, and demonstrate reformed practices before being considered for reinstatement. I felt no joy at this news, only a quiet sense of justice and the hope that she would genuinely learn from this experience. The woman had helped me through a devastating time, despite her ultimate betrayal. Part of me, the part that was healing, could recognize this complexity without excusing her behavior. My new therapist helped me see that trust isn't an all-or-nothing proposition. One person's betrayal doesn't mean everyone will betray you. Slowly, cautiously, I began to rebuild my capacity for trust in friends, in potential partners, in helping professionals, and most importantly, in myself. Last month, nearly 2 years after my divorce, I ran into my ex-husband at a grocery store. He was alone, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. He attempted small talk, then awkwardly asked how I was doing. I'm good, I replied, surprised to find I meant it. Really good, actually. As I walked away, I realized something profound. I no longer defined myself by what had happened to me. The betrayals, both my ex-husband's and Dr. Bennett's, were parts of my story, but they didn't control the narrative anymore. I did. My new therapist calls this post-traumatic growth, the possibility that surviving trauma can lead not just to healing, but to a deeper, more authentic life. I'm not grateful for the betrayals, but I am proud of who I've become because of how I chose to respond to them. Trust is fragile, isn't it? But what happens when someone deliberately tries to harm you in your own home? The mother-in-law who secretly added allergens to my food never expected to face financial ruin for her actions. I've had a severe peanut allergy since I was 3 years old. One bite of a peanut butter sandwich at preschool landed me in the hospital for a week, fighting for my life. Since then, I've been vigilant, reading labels obsessively, carrying EpiPens everywhere, and making sure everyone in my life understands the severity of my condition. Everyone except my mother-in-law, Diana. From the moment my husband, Jake, introduced us, Diana was skeptical. When Jake explained my allergy during our first dinner together, mentioning that even cross-contamination could be dangerous, she rolled her eyes. Oh, one of those, she said, emphasizing the word those like I was claiming to be allergic to oxygen. Seems like everyone has some special food issue these days. Jake immediately defended me. Mum, this isn't a preference. Emily could die. It's not an exaggeration. Diana smiled tightly. Of course, dear. We'll be careful. But she wasn't careful. Over the next 3 years of our relationship, Diana consistently forgot about my allergy or minimized its importance. She'd serve Thai food with hidden peanut sauce, then act shocked when I wouldn't eat it. She'd buy peanut butter cookies for dessert, then sigh dramatically when I declined. A little exposure is supposed to build immunity, she'd say, as if she'd suddenly become an allergist. I read an article about it. Every family gathering became a minefield. Jake always checked ingredients beforehand, often bringing separate food for me just to be safe. His father was actually quite understanding and made genuine efforts to accommodate me. But Diana, she seemed to take my allergy as a personal affront, like I'd developed it specifically to complicate her life. After we got married, things escalated. Diana would make pointed comments at family dinners. In my day, people just ate what was served and were grateful. Or, I never heard of peanut allergies when Jake was growing up. Now suddenly everyone has one. Jake confronted her multiple times, explaining that food allergies can be life-threatening and that modern medicine simply diagnoses conditions that always existed. She would nod along, then go right back to her passive-aggressive comments the next time we saw her. I tried everything to win her over. I brought thoughtful gifts, showed interest in her hobbies, offered to help with family events. Nothing worked. In her mind, I was either faking my allergy for attention or using it to be difficult. Things came to a head at a dinner celebrating Jake's promotion. Diana had invited the whole family and insisted on hosting at her house. I was apprehensive, but Jake assured me he'd spoken to her again about my allergy, and she'd promised to be careful. She's making her famous pasta with homemade sauce, he said, no nuts of any kind. When we arrived, Diana was all smiles and hugs, acting warmer toward me than she ever had before. I made everything peanut-free, she announced proudly. I even used a separate cutting board and utensils. I was touched. Maybe she was finally accepting me. I thanked her sincerely, and for once the pre-dinner conversation flowed without tension. The pasta did look delicious. Thick fettuccine noodles in a creamy red sauce with Italian sausage and herbs. Diana served me first, watching expectantly as I took my first bite. The secret is in the sauce, she said, smiling. A special blend of oils. I should have caught the gleam in her eye, the way she emphasized the word oils. But I was so happy about the apparent truth that I missed the warning signs. 3 bites in, my lips started tingling. By the 4th bite, my tongue was swelling. I recognized the symptoms immediately and grabbed my purse where I always keep an EpiPen. "Jake," I gasped, already struggling to breathe. "Hospital, now!" The room erupted in chaos. I jabbed the EpiPen into my thigh while Jake called 911. His father ran for the car, knowing the ambulance might take too long. Diana stood frozen, watching with an expression that shifted from surprise to something else. Not concern, but almost satisfaction. The next few hours were a blur of sirens, emergency rooms, and medical staff working frantically to stabilize me. My throat had nearly closed completely. If I hadn't used the EpiPen immediately, the doctors said I might not have made it to the hospital alive. I spent 3 days in intensive care. The reaction was one of the worst I'd ever experienced, requiring multiple epinephrine doses, steroids, and round-the-clock monitoring. Jake never left my side, sleeping in an uncomfortable hospital chair and holding my hand through the worst of it. On day 2, while I was finally stable enough to have a conversation, Jake told me what he'd discovered. "I went back to Mum's house to get your purse and phone," he said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "I decided to check her pantry. She had peanut oil, Emily, a brand new bottle, receipt still in the bag, dated yesterday." "Maybe it was for something else," I suggested weakly, not wanting to believe what this implied. Jake shook his head. "I confronted her. She denied it at first, said she'd never used peanut oil in pasta sauce. Then Dad stepped in and said he'd never seen peanut oil in their house before. That's when she admitted it." My heart sank. "Admitted what?" "Exactly. She said she added just a tiny bit of peanut oil to your portion of the sauce to prove you were exaggerating about your allergy." His voice broke. "She genuinely believed you were making it up or overreacting. She thought you'd maybe get a mild rash or an upset stomach and be embarrassed when it wasn't serious." I stared at the ceiling, processing this. My mother-in-law had deliberately poisoned me. Not out of malice exactly, but from a place of such profound disbelief and dismissal that she'd been willing to risk my health to prove a point. "There's more," Jake continued, pulling out his phone. "Remember that nanny cam we bought when we were pet sitting for my cousin?" I nodded. After several suspicious incidents at Diana's house, mysteriously developing rashes after using her guest towels, getting sick after drinking tea she'd prepared, I had secretly placed a small camera in her kitchen during our last visit, disguised as a phone charger. I hadn't told Jake, not wanting to seem paranoid about his mother. "You put it in Mum's kitchen," he said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Because the police found it when they searched the house." The police, of course, intentionally exposing someone to a known allergen, crosses the line from family drama to criminal assault. The camera captured everything, Emily. Mum adding peanut oil to a separate small pot of sauce, stirring it in, then carefully plating it for you. She was... He struggled to continue. She was smirking while she did it. He showed me the footage on his phone. There was Diana clearly visible in her kitchen, taking a small bottle from a shopping bag, checking over her shoulder, then adding it to a pot of sauce she'd separated from the main batch. The smirk on her face as she prepared my plate was unmistakable. That's when everything unraveled. The district attorney charged Diana with assault with a deadly weapon and reckless endangerment. The evidence was irrefutable. The footage, the hospital records confirming anaphylaxis, her own admission to Jake, and the peanut oil bottle with her fingerprints. Diana hired an expensive lawyer who tried to argue she never intended serious harm. But the video of her smirking while adding the allergen, combined with years of documented dismissal of my condition, painted a damning picture. She ended up accepting a plea deal, probation instead of jail time, but with a felony record and full financial responsibility for my medical expenses. Those expenses were astronomical, 3 days in intensive care, multiple specialist consultations, and follow-up treatments totaled over $87,000, even with our insurance covering a portion. The court ordered Diana to pay the full amount, plus an additional $50,000 in punitive damages. Diana, it turned out, was not nearly as financially stable as she'd always pretended to be. Her house had a second mortgage, her credit cards were maxed out, and her retirement savings were modest. To pay the judgment, she had to sell her house, drain her 401k, and move into a small apartment. Jake's father divorced her during the legal proceedings, horrified by what she'd done and her lack of genuine remorse. Most of the family sided with us, though a few relatives suggested we should have kept it a family matter rather than involving police. The family is fractured now, holiday gatherings awkward and divided. Diana's life has been upended, her home gone, her retirement plans destroyed, her relationship with her son possibly damaged beyond repair. Sometimes I feel a twinge of guilt about how everything unfolded, but then I remember those terrifying moments when I couldn't breathe, when I genuinely thought I might die at my mother-in-law's dinner table. Jake has been my rock through all of this. He cut contact with his mother after her sentencing, telling her he couldn't have a relationship with someone who intentionally endangered his wife's life. "You made your choice, Mom," he told her. "You chose your pride and your disbelief over Emily's safety. I can't forgive that." We're in therapy now, working through the trauma of the incident and the complicated feelings that come with essentially destroying a family member's life, even in self-defense. Our therapist reminds us that Diana made her choices, first to deliberately expose me to a known allergen, and then to maintain her denial and minimization throughout the legal process. Last month, we received a letter from Diana, the first contact since the court case. I expected more denial, maybe even blame. Instead, it was a brief note acknowledging what she'd done, admitting she never truly believed allergies could be so severe. "I thought you were being dramatic," she wrote. "I was wrong, and I almost killed you because of my ignorance." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something, a first step toward recognizing reality. At least, we haven't responded yet. I'm not sure we ever will. The irony isn't lost on me that in trying to prove my allergy wasn't serious, Diana created a situation that demonstrated just how life-threatening it truly is. She gambled with my life and lost everything: her home, her marriage, her relationship with her son, her financial security, all because she couldn't accept that someone else's medical reality didn't conform to her beliefs. Some family members think we should forgive Diana, now that she's learned her lesson. But forgiveness isn't simple when someone has deliberately put your life at risk. Trust, once broken at that fundamental level, may never fully heal. For now, we're focusing on our own healing, on building our lives without Diana's toxic presence. Jake and I are expecting our first child next spring. We've already decided that any relationship between Diana and our child will be heavily supervised, if it exists at all. Some mistakes can't be undone, some boundaries can't be crossed without permanent consequences. As my new allergist told me during a follow-up appointment, your body's reaction isn't dramatic, it's your immune system fighting for your life. Anyone who can't respect that doesn't deserve a place at your table. Some betrayals come from those we expect to love us most, but others come from people we barely know, like the roommate who used my toothbrush for the most disgusting purpose imaginable. When I moved to Seattle for my new tech job, housing prices nearly gave me a heart attack. Paying $12,800 for a one-bedroom apartment seemed insane, so I reluctantly decided to find a roommate. After interviewing several candidates, I settled on Jen, a seemingly professional woman in her early 30s who worked as a food safety inspector for King County. She had steady income, excellent references, and during our meetup, she emphasized how much she valued cleanliness. Perfect, right? The first month went smoothly. We established basic roommate rules, split chores evenly, and respected each other's space. We weren't best friends, but we were cordial, occasionally sharing a bottle of wine while watching reality TV or recommending restaurants to each other. Around the 6-week mark, I noticed something odd. My toothbrush was wet in the mornings before I used it. At first, I thought maybe the bathroom was just humid, or perhaps I was misremembering whether I'd already brushed my teeth. Those early morning tech stand-ups were killing my brain cells. But after it happened several more times, I started paying closer attention. I began marking the position of my toothbrush before bed, taking mental notes of exactly how I left it. Sure enough, it was consistently moved slightly and wet in the mornings. I considered the possibilities. Maybe Jen was accidentally knocking it when reaching for something. Maybe there was a leak somewhere making everything damp. But the wetness was only on my toothbrush, not the counter or other items. You're being paranoid, I told myself. What kind of adult would mess with someone else's toothbrush? Still, I replaced my toothbrush and started keeping it in my bedroom. For a few days, everything seemed normal. Then one morning, I found my new toothbrush wet again, meaning Jen had to have entered my bedroom to access it. That crossed a major line. Rather than jumping to accusations, I decided I needed proof. I ordered a small, motion-activated camera that looked like a phone charger and positioned it in our shared bathroom with a clear view of the sink area. I felt a little creepy setting up a camera, but I made sure it only captured the sink counter and didn't intrude on shower privacy. I left the camera running for 3 days, checking the footage each evening when Jen was at her yoga class. The first 2 days showed nothing unusual, but on the third day, I captured something that made my stomach turn. The video showed Jen entering the bathroom at 6:17 a.m., looking around cautiously, then taking my toothbrush from its holder. With a small, satisfied smirk on her face, she proceeded to use my toothbrush to scrub the toilet bowl, paying special attention to the grimiest parts under the rim. After thoroughly contaminating it, she rinsed it off, returned it to its holder, and left. I watched the footage 5 times, hoping somehow I was misinterpreting what I was seeing. But there was no ambiguity. My roommate was deliberately using my toothbrush to clean the toilet, then letting me put that same toothbrush in my mouth. The realization hit me like a truck. I had been brushing my teeth with a toilet brush for how long? Based on when I first noticed the wet toothbrush, this had potentially been going on for 3 months. 90 days of exposing myself to whatever bacteria lurked in our toilet. I immediately ran to the bathroom and gargled with half a bottle of Listerine, fighting waves of nausea. Once the initial shock subsided, my next question was obvious. Why? What could possibly motivate an adult professional woman to do something so disgusting and potentially harmful to her roommate? I decided to confront Jen directly. I waited until she came home from work, then asked her to sit down for a talk. Is there something bothering you about our living arrangement? I began, trying to give her an opportunity to confess. Not at all, she replied with a pleasant smile. Everything's fine. Then can you explain why you've been using my toothbrush to clean the toilet? Her expression froze, then quickly shifted to indignation. What are you talking about? That's disgusting. Why would you accuse me of something like that? I pulled out my phone and played the video. As she watched herself on screen, her face went through a remarkable transformation. Shock, embarrassment, then defiance. You put a camera in our bathroom. That's an invasion of privacy. She deflected. The camera only captures the sink area, and it was only installed after I noticed someone was tampering with my personal items, I replied calmly. Now I'll ask again, why have you been doing this? Finally cornered, Jen's justification left me speechless. You're too loud on your work calls, she said, as if this explained everything. You're always talking and laughing with your co-workers while I'm trying to sleep or relax. I asked you once to keep it down, and you said you'd try, but You didn't really change anything. I vaguely remembered her mentioning my cool volume once, months ago. I had made an effort to close my door and speak more quietly after that, but apparently it wasn't enough for Jen. So your response to me being occasionally loud on work calls was to contaminate my toothbrush with toilet bacteria for 3 months? Do you realize how completely disproportionate and disturbing that is? You wouldn't listen, she said stubbornly. I needed to do something. Something like talking to me again, or using headphones, or literally any other response besides biological warfare. The absolute disconnect between her minor grievance and her extreme, disgusting revenge was staggering. The mental gymnastics required to justify such behavior were beyond my comprehension. This wasn't just pettiness, it was a dangerous disregard for another person's health. Then came the breaking point. As we continued arguing, Jen actually had the audacity to say, "It's not like you got sick or anything. I rinsed it off afterward." That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with a rational person. This wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. This was someone who fundamentally lacked empathy and proper boundaries. And this person was a food safety inspector, literally responsible for ensuring restaurants and food facilities maintained proper hygiene practices. Let that sink in. The woman who thought using my toothbrush as a toilet brush was appropriate revenge for loud phone calls was professionally responsible for determining whether restaurants were meeting health and safety standards. I told Jen she needed to move out immediately. She refused, citing our lease agreement. Technically, she was right. I couldn't legally force her to leave. But I had something more powerful than a lease clause. "Fine," I said. "Stay if you want, but I think your employer would be very interested to see this video of a food safety inspector deliberately contaminating someone's personal hygiene item with toilet bacteria." Her face paled. "You wouldn't. Wouldn't I? You've been potentially exposing me to harmful bacteria for 3 months out of petty revenge. Why should I protect your career when you showed zero concern for my health?" The next day, I sent the video anonymously to the director of King County's Food Safety Division, along with a detailed explanation of what had been happening. I included the date range of suspected contamination and Jen's own admission that she'd done it because I was too loud on phone calls. The response was swift. Jen was immediately placed on administrative leave pending investigation. 2 weeks later, she was terminated for demonstrating a dangerous disregard for basic hygiene standards and engaging in deliberately harmful contamination practices, qualities obviously incompatible with food safety inspection. When Jen received her termination notice, she knew exactly who was responsible. She stormed into the apartment, waving the letter and screaming that I had ruined her life. "You ruined your own career," I responded calmly. "Actions have consequences." As reality set in, her anger turned to panic. Finding another job in food safety with a termination for hygiene violations would be nearly impossible. Her entire career trajectory was derailed. "Please," she begged, suddenly changing tactics. "Don't tell any potential employers if they call for references. I'll do anything." "Anything? I'll pay 6 months of rent up front. Just, please don't destroy my future completely." I considered her offer. 6 months of rent would give me time to find a better living situation without financial stress. I agreed to her terms with 2 conditions. She would move out immediately and she would provide a written confession of what she'd done, which I would keep as insurance. She complied, transferring the money and moving out within a week. I kept my end of the bargain regarding employment references, but I did make sure our mutual friends knew exactly what kind of person they were dealing with. Most were as disgusted as I was, and Jen's social circle rapidly contracted. The last I heard, Jen had moved to another state and was working in a completely different field. I sometimes wonder if she learned anything from the experience, or if she still believes her actions were justified. As for me, I now live alone in a small but clean apartment where no one touches my toothbrush. I keep all my personal hygiene items in a locked case. perhaps an overreaction, but after what happened with Jen, I don't think I'll ever look at a wet toothbrush the same way again. Oh, and I gargle with hydrogen peroxide weekly, just to be safe. Some traumas leave lasting habits. If you thought that was disturbing, imagine discovering your father had a second family at the worst possible moment. Your mother's funeral. My mum fought ovarian cancer for 3 years before she died. She battled with everything she had, enduring brutal rounds of chemo, experimental treatments, and surgeries that left her weak but determined. Through it all, my dad was, well, he was there when he could be. His job as a pharmaceutical sales director required frequent travel, at least 1 week out of every month, sometimes more. Mum never complained, saying his job had given us a comfortable life and good health insurance, which was paying for her treatments. The last few months were the hardest. Mum's oncologist suggested a promising new immunotherapy, but our insurance only covered part of it. Dad said he'd figure something out, but ultimately decided the treatment was too experimental and the out-of-pocket cost too high. Instead, he focused on making Mum comfortable. She died on a Tuesday morning in April, with me holding one hand and Dad holding the other. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday. Dad handled most of the arrangements while I dealt with my grief by focusing on practical matters, notifying distant relatives, selecting photos for the memorial slideshow, and helping pick music for the service. Mum had been beloved in our community, so we expected a good turnout. The service was beautiful and gut-wrenching in equal measure. I somehow made it through my eulogy without completely breaking down. Dad's speech was shorter but touching. He talked about their 30-year marriage, calling Mum the only woman I've ever truly loved, and the center of my world. Several of Mum's friends spoke about her kindness, her sharp wit, her dedication to her students as a high school English teacher. After the service, during the reception at our family home, I was accepting condolences when a woman about my age approached me. She had dark hair like mine, similar height, and something vaguely familiar about her features that I couldn't place. "Hi," she said, her voice tense. "You don't know me, but I think we're sisters." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" She took a deep breath. "My name is Jessica. Jessica Harmon. Harmon, my last name. My father's name." "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake," I said, looking around desperately for my dad. "I don't have any siblings." That's what I thought too until last week. Jessica motioned toward the entrance where 3 more people stood awkwardly. 2 women and a young man, all in their 20s, all watching us intently. "Those are Emma, Lily, and Daniel. We're your father's children." The room seemed to tilt. Several relatives had noticed the strange interaction and were watching curiously. Before I could respond, Jessica continued. "Our mother just found out that Dad has another family, you and your mum. He's been living a double life for decades. When we saw his name in the obituary, Mum sent us to confront him." That's when I noticed her hands were shaking. She wasn't confrontational. She was terrified, and suddenly something inside me knew she was telling the truth. Those familiar features I couldn't place. They were my father's. "Where is he?" I managed to ask. "Your mother?" "Mum couldn't bring herself to come. She's devastated. We've been arguing about what to do since we found out. When we saw the obituary, Emma thought we should wait, but I couldn't. I needed to see." She trailed off as my father entered the room, carrying a tray of sandwiches. He froze when he saw Jessica, his face draining of color. The tray slipped from his hands, sending food scattering across the floor. That moment, my father's expression of pure panic confirmed everything. My legs nearly gave out beneath me. "Dad?" I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "What's going on?" The next hour was chaos. Dad tried to hustle Jessica and the others outside, but Emma, the oldest I would later learn, refused to be silenced. She announced to the entire reception exactly who they were. Relatives gasped. Mum's friends whispered in shock. My uncle physically restrained my father when he tried to flee the scene. In the midst of the chaos, the truth emerged in ugly fragments. For nearly 30 years, my father had maintained two complete households, one with my mother and me in Oakland, another with his other wife, Teresa, and their 4 children in Sacramento, about 2 hours away. His frequent business trips were actually his time with his other family. He had constructed elaborate lies, telling each family that his job required regular travel. How could you possibly maintain this for decades? My aunt demanded. Dad's explanation was pathetically simple. He'd worked in pharmaceutical sales, which gave him control over his own schedule. He'd simply blocked off alternating weeks as territory work or conventions. He had separate phones, separate credit cards, even separate wardrobes in each home. When one family asked about calling him during business trips, he'd claim he'd be in meetings or areas with poor reception. My world imploded as I mentally recalculated our entire family history. Every missed school play, every abbreviated Christmas, every time he'd been stuck at a conference during family emergencies. He'd been with his other family. The half of his life I thought was dedicated to providing for us was actually spent building and maintaining a parallel existence. That's when things went from devastating to truly twisted. As we argued in what had become an impromptu family tribunal, Jessica mentioned something about her recent college graduation. Dad paid my full tuition at Stanford, she said. It was tight financially, but he said I deserved it. I froze. When did you start at Stanford? 3 years ago. 3 years ago, when my mother was diagnosed with cancer. When Dad said we couldn't afford the experimental treatment that might have given her more time, maybe even saved her life. I confronted him directly, and after stammering excuses, he admitted the horrible truth. He had diverted funds meant for Mum's treatment to pay for Jessica's education. He'd been juggling finances between both families for years, robbing from one to pay the other, always managing to maintain his dual life. But that wasn't even the worst part. During a private moment, my uncle pulled me aside and mentioned something concerning about Dad's behavior since the funeral. He's been making calls about real estate, my uncle said. I overheard him talking about closing on a lake house. Doesn't seem like something a grieving widower would prioritize. I hired a private investigator the next day. Within a week, we discovered Dad had taken out a second life insurance policy on Mom years ago, naming himself as the sole beneficiary. The $500,000 payout had already been used as a down payment on a vacation home in Lake Tahoe, a surprise for Teresa and her children. Money that should have gone to my mother's medical care had been diverted to his second family. Insurance money from her death was being used to buy them a luxury vacation home. The man I'd trusted implicitly my entire life had essentially sacrificed my mother's care for his secret family's comfort. The grief I'd felt for my mother transformed into something darker, colder, more focused. This wasn't just betrayal, it was criminal. With my uncle's support, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in insurance fraud. Together, we uncovered a web of financial crimes spanning decades, falsified insurance claims, tax fraud from filing incorrect dependent information, embezzlement from his company's expense accounts to fund his double life, and misappropriation of medical funds. I turned everything over to the authorities. Dad was arrested 3 weeks after Mum's funeral. During the investigation, even more appalling details emerged. Dad had purposely scheduled Mum's cancer treatments around his time with the other family, sometimes delaying critical care to avoid disrupting his schedule. He'd used his pharmaceutical background to adjust her pain medication when he needed her more sedated to slip away for longer periods. The prosecution was merciless. Dad's lawyer attempted a mental health defense, claiming the stress of maintaining two families had caused psychological breaks. The judge wasn't sympathetic. My father was sentenced to 5 years in prison for insurance fraud, embezzlement, and several related financial crimes. The financial fallout was devastating for both families. The authorities froze most of Dad's assets. The lake house was seized. Both family homes had to be sold to pay legal fees and restitution. Teresa lost her comfortable lifestyle, discovering that much of what she thought they owned was leveraged with debt or purchased with fraudulently obtained funds. In a twist I never could have predicted, this shared catastrophe created an unexpected bond between me and my half-siblings. None of us had asked for this situation. None of us had known about the other family. We were all victims of the same man's unfathomable deception. Jessica reached out first, suggesting we meet for coffee away from the drama. We sat across from each other, two women the same age with the same dark hair and our father's eyes, trying to process how we could have shared a parent for nearly 3 decades without knowing of each other's existence. I keep thinking about all the holidays, she said, when he'd called to say his flight was delayed or he was stuck at a conference. He was with you, wasn't he? I nodded. And when he missed my college graduation for an emergency sales meeting. That was my high school graduation weekend, she finished. Slowly, painfully, we reconstructed our parallel lives, filling in the gaps of our father's absences with the realities of his presence elsewhere. It was agonizing, but also strangely healing. Eventually, Emma, Lily, and Daniel joined our conversations. We found weird commonalities, inside jokes with Dad that he'd recycled between families, favorite foods he'd claimed to discover on business trips that were actually borrowed from one family to impress the other. Teresa, understandably, wanted nothing to do with me initially. To her, I represented decades of betrayal. But eventually, as the legal and financial nightmare forced us into contact, we developed a strained but respectful relationship. We were both widows of a living man, both mourning relationships that had never really existed except in our minds. It's been 2 years now. Dad still has 3 years left on his sentence. None of us visit him. Teresa filed for divorce. I legally changed my last name to my mother's maiden name. The half-siblings and I meet monthly for dinner, navigating our strange new reality as a fractured but healing family unit. The father I thought I knew never existed. The family I thought was small and close-knit was actually expansive and built on lies. But from the ashes of those fabrications, something authentic has emerged. A relationship with 4 siblings I never knew I had, bound together by the unique understanding that only shared trauma can create. Sometimes I wonder if Mom somehow knew, if she had suspicions she never voiced. But mostly I'm grateful she died, believing she was loved completely and exclusively by her husband of 30 years. Some truths are too cruel to serve any purpose except destruction. Some workplace rivalries get personal, but nothing compares to the coworker who stole my promotion through an elaborate lie until a simple DNA test exposed the truth. I spent 5 years working my way up at Nexus Biotech, starting as a research assistant and eventually becoming senior project manager for our flagship gene therapy program. When Dr. Reynolds, our vice president of research, announced his retirement, everyone knew I was the natural successor. I had the publications, the patent applications, the team management experience, and most importantly, the respect of our scientists. The role felt like the culmination of everything I'd worked toward. Then Melissa Chen joined the company. Melissa arrived with stellar credentials, a Harvard PhD in molecular biology, 3 years at Genentech, and an impressive list of publications. Within 6 months, she managed to position herself as Dr. Reynolds' right hand, somehow getting assigned to all the high-profile projects and investor presentations. I tried not to be resentful. Competition is healthy, and Melissa was undeniably smart and charismatic. But something about her rapid rise felt off. Isn't it interesting how Melissa always manages to be in the right place at the right time? My colleague Tom remarked after she was selected to represent Nexus at a prestigious industry conference, a role that traditionally went to more senior staff. She's good at what she does, I replied diplomatically, though privately I agreed with him. When Dr. Reynolds officially announced his retirement, the company opened applications for his position. I submitted mine immediately, confident in my qualifications. Melissa applied as well, despite having been with the company only 2 years. Based on our respective track records at Nexus, I assumed I had the edge, but our CEO, Dr. Garrett, insisted on a thorough and fair process. The interview rounds progressed, and Melissa and I consistently emerged as the top candidates. My longer tenure and deeper knowledge of our research pipeline was balanced against her prestigious background and undeniable charisma in presentations. By the final round, we were neck and neck. Then came the decisive interview with Dr. Garrett himself. I gave what I felt was a strong performance, outlining my vision for the department and highlighting the relationships I'd built with our research teams over the years. When I left his office, I felt cautiously optimistic. The next day, the announcement went out. Melissa Chen would be the new VP of Research, effective immediately. I was crushed but tried to maintain professionalism. At the company celebration dinner that evening, I forced a smile and congratulated Melissa, who accepted with practiced grace. As I nursed my disappointment over a glass of wine, I overheard Dr. Garrett speaking with our chief financial officer. Beyond her qualifications, there's something about Melissa that just clicked, he was saying. When she mentioned during her interview that Ehlers-Danlos syndrome runs in her family too, we're practically distant cousins. That connection just sealed the deal for me. I nearly choked on my drink. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a rare genetic condition affecting connective tissue, one that Dr. Garrett had openly discussed having. It's extremely uncommon, affecting only about 1 in 5,000 people worldwide. The odds of Melissa coincidentally having this family connection seemed improbable. Something about this revelation triggered my scientific skepticism. If Melissa would leverage a dubious family medical connection to gain professional advantage, what else might she have embellished? The next day, I began discreetly researching Melissa's background. I started with Harvard, calling their alumni office to verify her degree for a potential collaboration. After several transfers, I received a puzzling response. They had no record of a Melissa Chen receiving a PhD in molecular biology during the years she claimed. Perhaps there's been a mistake in our records, the administrator suggested. Do you have any additional information that might help us locate her file? I thanked them and hung up, my suspicions growing. Next, I contacted a former colleague now at Genentech, casually asking about Melissa's work there. Melissa Chen. The name doesn't ring a bell. What department was she in? Oncology research, around 2018 to 2021, I replied. I was in that department then. We had a Michelle Chen, but no Melissa that I recall. That's when everything unraveled. Over the next week, I methodically checked every significant claim on Melissa's resume. Her publication record, several papers existed, but with authors whose names were similar but not identical to hers. Her previous positions, either the companies had no record of her employment, or the roles she claimed were significantly inflated. Most damning of all, I found her real LinkedIn profile under her actual name, Melissa Wang, which showed a far less impressive career trajectory. She had indeed worked in biotech, but primarily in marketing roles, not research. She'd attended UC Davis, not Harvard, and her degree was in general biology, not molecular genetics. I was stunned. Melissa hadn't just embellished her resume, she'd fabricated an entirely fictional professional identity. And now she was vice president of research at a company developing cutting-edge gene therapies. The question was, what to do with this information? If I presented my findings directly, it might look like sour grapes from a rejected candidate. I needed irrefutable proof and a way to reveal it that wouldn't immediately implicate me. My opportunity came when our HR department announced a new employee wellness initiative, including optional health screenings. Genetic testing was mentioned as a potential future component, primarily to identify risk factors for various conditions. During the planning meeting, I casually suggested, what about adding a fun element to this? Companies like 23andMe offer ancestry analysis along with health markers. People might be more enthusiastic about participating if there's that added benefit. The HR director loved the idea. It could be a real team-building experience, discovering unexpected connections between colleagues. The company contracted with a genetic testing firm that specialized in corporate wellness programs. Participation was voluntary but strongly encouraged as part of our culture of scientific curiosity. Nearly everyone signed up, including Melissa and Dr. Garrett, who openly discussed his excitement about seeing if anyone else in the company shared genetic markers for Ehlers-Danlos. 6 weeks later, the results arrived. Employees received their individual reports privately, but there was also an optional genetic network feature showing anonymous connections between participants. Dr. Garrett, enthusiastic about genetics given our company's focus, made a point of checking for matches to his rare condition markers. He found none, certainly not with Melissa. Confused, Dr. Garrett mentioned this to Melissa at their next one-on-one meeting. According to my friend in HR, her explanation was a tangled mess of backtracking. Perhaps it was a different branch of Ehlers-Danlos, or maybe the connection was more distant than she thought, or possibly her family's medical history had been misdiagnosed. The seed of doubt was planted. Dr. Garrett, his trust shaken, began looking more closely at Melissa's qualifications. He requested formal verification of her Harvard degree for company records, standard procedure that had somehow been overlooked during her hiring. When Harvard once again confirmed they had no record of her, a full investigation was launched. Within 2 weeks, the truth was exposed. Melissa was called into a closed-door meeting with Dr. Garrett, our legal counsel, and the head of HR. She emerged 30 minutes later, escorted by security, carrying a box of personal items. The company-wide email was diplomatic but clear. Due to significant discrepancies discovered in her credentials, Melissa Chen is no longer with Nexus Biotech. We are reviewing our hiring procedures to ensure this situation is not repeated. 3 days later, I was offered the VP position. My first week as Vice President of Research, I implemented a new policy requiring thorough background checks and credential verification for all new hires, especially for senior positions. The company hired a specialized firm to verify educational credentials, employment history, and professional licenses, a practice that should have been standard all along. Looking back, I am still amazed at the audacity. Melissa gambled everything on a lie so big no one thought to question it. She correctly assessed that in our industry, Harvard credentials and impressive connections can open doors that might otherwise remain closed. She nearly got away with it too, if not for that one step too far, claiming a genetic connection she couldn't possibly have. The experience changed how I view professional relationships. I'm less trusting now, more inclined to verify claims before accepting them at face value. But it also reinforced my belief in the importance of authentic accomplishment. Melissa's house of cards collapsed because it had no foundation in reality. My position, earned through years of genuine work and measurable results, stands on solid ground. As for Melissa, I heard she left the state and reinvented herself again, this time in the tech industry, claiming expertise in AI and machine learning. I sometimes wonder how many times she'll repeat this cycle before realizing that sustained success requires more than a fictional resume and practiced confidence. But that's her journey to figure out, not mine. Deception hurts most when it comes from those closest to us, like when my best friend not only seduced my husband, but had the audacity to send me their wedding invitation. Rachel and I had been best friends since our freshman year of college. We were inseparable, roommates for 4 years, bridesmaids at each other's weddings, godmothers to each other's children. She knew everything about me, and I thought I knew everything about her. When I say everything, I mean everything, from my most embarrassing moments to my deepest insecurities. Rachel was my person, the one I called at 2 a.m. when my world was falling apart. After college, our lives took different paths professionally, but remained intertwined personally. I became an elementary school teacher, while Rachel pursued a master's in psychology and eventually joined a respected mental health clinic in our city. I was so proud of her, watching her build a career helping people through their darkest moments. I bragged about my brilliant therapist friend to anyone who would listen. Rachel was there for all the important moments in my life, including when I met Dan at a mutual friend's barbecue 7 years ago. She encouraged our relationship, helped me pick out my wedding dress, and gave a beautiful, tear-jerking speech at our reception. In her words, we were the perfect match, and she was honored to witness such a rare and beautiful love story. For 5 years, my marriage to Dan was everything I'd hoped for. We had our disagreements, of course, but nothing major. We were building a life together, buying a small house in the suburbs, discussing when to start a family, planning for our future. Then came what I now call the unraveling. Dan's company went through a merger, resulting in longer hours and increased stress. I was dealing with a particularly challenging class at school, bringing home emotional exhaustion each day. We started arguing about small things, then bigger things. Communication broke down. Intimacy became rare, then non-existent. We were two ships passing in the night, coexisting rather than connecting. Naturally, I turned to Rachel for support. During our weekly wine nights, I poured out my fears and frustrations. She listened with that perfect therapist blend of empathy and insight, offering advice that seemed both professional and personal. Every marriage goes through rough patches, she assured me. The question is whether you're both willing to do the work to get through it. I was willing. I suggested counseling, but Dan was resistant. We don't need some stranger telling us how to fix our marriage, he insisted. That's when Rachel made her offer. What if I could help? She suggested one evening, after I'd been particularly upset about another argument with Dan. Not as a formal therapist, obviously. That would be ethically complicated since I'm friends with both of you. But I could talk to Dan separately, give him a space to express his feelings. Sometimes men open up more when their partners aren't present. I hesitated. Wouldn't that be weird for you, hearing all our problems? Rachel smiled reassuringly. I'm a professional, remember? Plus, I care about you both. I want to see your marriage succeed. It made sense. Rachel had the training, she knew us both well, and Dan might be more receptive to talking with a friend than a stranger. So I agreed, gratefully. For the next few months, Dan would meet Rachel for coffee once a week. He seemed to enjoy these sessions, coming home more relaxed and sometimes even initiating conversations about our relationship. Rachel would give me general updates. He's opening up more, or he's dealing with a lot of work stress, while maintaining what she called therapeutic confidentiality about the specifics. I was hopeful. Things seemed to be improving, albeit slowly. Dan and I were fighting less, though there was still a distance between us I couldn't quite bridge. Then, 6 months after these sessions began, Dan sat me down for a conversation that blindsided me completely. I want a divorce, he said quietly. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I don't believe our marriage can be saved. We want different things from life, and I think we'd both be happier moving on. I was devastated, but we've been working on things. I thought we were making progress. That's just it, he replied. The more I've reflected, the more I've realized we're fundamentally incompatible. It's no one's fault. When I pressed for specifics, he cited irreconcilable differences, that meaningless legal phrase that explains nothing while ending everything. I called Rachel immediately after, sobbing so hard I could barely speak. To my surprise, she didn't seem shocked. Sometimes these conversations bring clarity rather than reconciliation, she said gently. Maybe this is for the best in the long run. I was hurt by her lack of surprise, by her seeming acceptance of the end of my marriage, but I was too overwhelmed with grief to question it further. In the weeks that followed, as Dan and I navigated the logistical nightmare of separating our lives, Rachel became more distant. Our wine nights dwindled, then stopped. She cited being swamped at work whenever I suggested getting together. The divorce was finalized with clinical efficiency. Dan and I split our assets without much conflict. Another sign, I later realized, that his mind had been made up long before he told me. We sold the house, divided the furniture, and went our separate ways. For a year, I focused on rebuilding my life. New apartment, new hobbies, new friends through a divorce support group. I had minimal contact with Dan, just occasional texts about stray mail or forgotten items. Rachel and I spoke less frequently too, though I attributed this to the natural awkwardness that comes when a friend group fractures after a divorce. And then, 13 months after my divorce was finalized, a thick cream envelope arrived in my mail. The return address showed Rachel's name alongside Dan's. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. Inside was a wedding invitation, ornately designed with gold embossing and floral motifs. Rachel and Dan were getting married. In 3 months, I sat on my kitchen floor, the invitation in my trembling hands, trying to process this betrayal. Had they been having an affair? Had those therapy sessions been a cover? Why hadn't either of them told me they were dating? Then I turned the invitation over and found the answer to all my questions. The back featured a section titled Our Story, a trendy addition to wedding invitations where couples share how they met and fell in love. It read, Rachel and Dan's journey began 2 years ago, when what started as therapeutic sessions blossomed into a deep connection neither expected. As Rachel helped Dan navigate a difficult time, they discovered a rare understanding and compatibility that transcended their original counselor-client relationship. Their professional boundaries gave way to friendship, then love, creating a foundation of honesty, vulnerability, and mutual respect that continues to strengthen with each passing day. 2 years ago, when I was still married to Dan, when Rachel was supposedly helping us save our marriage, the dates confirmed what my heart already knew. Their affair had started months before Dan asked for divorce. Those therapy sessions designed to save my marriage had been the very thing destroying it from within. My husband and my best friend betraying me under the guise of helping me. That's when everything unraveled. The careful compartmentalization I'd built during my year of healing shattered. I wasn't just a woman whose marriage had failed due to natural growing apart. I was a woman who had been deliberately deceived by the two people she trusted most in the world. What made it even more sickening was the ethical violation. Rachel wasn't just my friend who'd fallen for my husband. She was a licensed therapist who had established a counseling relationship with Dan, then pursued a romantic relationship with him while he was still married to me. This crossed every professional boundary in her field. After the initial shock wore off, a cold clarity took its place. I scanned the invitation and forwarded it to the clinical director at the mental health center where Rachel practiced, along with a brief email. I believe you should be aware that one of your therapists, Rachel Mitchell, has engaged in a romantic relationship with a client she was counseling. As the attached wedding invitation confirms in their own words, this relationship began during therapy sessions 2 years ago, while he was still married to me, her best friend of 15 years. I understand there are strict ethical guidelines regarding therapist-client relationships, and I felt obligated to bring this to your attention. I sent similar emails to our state's Psychology Licensing Board and the American Psychological Association's Ethics Committee, including screenshots of text messages where Rachel had referenced her sessions with Dan. The response was swift. Within a week, Rachel was placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. 2 weeks later, she was terminated from her position at the clinic. The licensing board opened a formal investigation. ultimately resulting in the suspension of her therapy license for ethical violations. Meanwhile, the wedding invitation had gone out to our entire social circle, people who knew us both, who had witnessed our friendship over 15 years. The Our Story section didn't just reveal their relationship to me, it announced to everyone that their romance had begun inappropriately during my marriage under the pretense of helping that very marriage. Most of our friends were horrified. The responses to their invitation were predominantly declines, often accompanied by messages expressing disappointment and disapproval. Rachel reached out to me in panic, first with angry accusations of professional sabotage, then with tearful pleas for forgiveness and understanding. "We didn't mean for it to happen," she insisted. "Sometimes feelings develop in unexpected ways. We didn't want to hurt you." "But you did hurt me," I replied. "And you didn't just have feelings, you acted on them, lied about them, and built your relationship on the ruins of mine." Then you had the audacity to broadcast the timeline in your wedding invitation. Dan contacted me too, claiming they had fought their feelings until after our separation. The invitation's wording had been misleading, he claimed. But by then, I'd pieced together too many inconsistencies in their stories, too many suspicious coincidences in the timing of events. Their wedding went forward, though it was a shadow of the celebration they'd planned. Many guests withdrew, the elegant venue they'd booked mysteriously became unavailable, and Rachel's professional reputation was in tatters. The clinic asked her to return her company laptop, where they discovered she had documented her feelings for Dan in her private session notes dating back to their third meeting. Clear evidence of her ethical breach. I didn't attend, obviously. Instead, I spent that day hiking in the mountains with supportive friends who'd chosen me over them. As we reached a spectacular viewpoint overlooking the valley, I felt something unexpected. Not joy at their misfortune, but relief at my escape. I had lost a husband and a best friend, but I had also been freed from relationships built on deception. 2 years have passed since then. Rachel eventually relocated to another state after being unable to secure employment in our city's mental health community. Dan followed her. I sometimes hear updates through mutual acquaintances. Their marriage is struggling under the weight of its origins, their social circle small and strained. As for me, I'm dating again, cautiously. I've made new friends who know my story and respect my boundaries. I've learned that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, but only with people who deserve it. When someone takes advantage of your absence, the betrayal cuts deep, just like when my brother sold my cherished car while I was deployed overseas. My grandfather was a military man, and growing up, I knew him as someone stern but loving. While he rarely expressed affection verbally, he showed it through actions, teaching me to fish, helping with school projects, and most importantly, sharing his passion for classic cars. His pride and joy was a 1969 Ford Mustang Mach-1 in Acapulco blue, with the 428 Cobra jet engine. That car was his therapy, his hobby, and his connection to happier times. When I turned 16, Grandpa surprised me by suggesting we restore the Mustang together. "This car's getting old like me," he'd said with a rare smile. "Figured we could give it new life before I'm gone." For the next 2 years, we spent every weekend in his garage, stripping the car down to its frame and rebuilding it piece by meticulous piece. He taught me everything: how to replace brake lines, rebuild an engine, properly sand and paint. Those hours in the garage became our sacred time, the place where he finally opened up about his life, his regrets, his hopes for me. When my grandfather passed away suddenly from a heart attack during my senior year of college, the Mustang became more than just a car. It was the physical embodiment of our relationship, the vessel containing hundreds of hours of conversations and lessons. In his will, he left it to me with a simple note: "Take care of her, and she'll take care of you." After college, I followed in my grandfather's footsteps and joined the military. It wasn't a difficult decision. Service ran in our family, and the discipline and purpose appealed to me. When I received orders for my first deployment to Afghanistan, I faced the question of what to do with the Mustang. My apartment complex had exposed parking, and leaving a classic car unattended for 9 months seemed like an invitation for trouble. My brother Jake offered to keep it in his garage and take good care of it while I was gone. Jake and I had never been particularly close. He was 5 years older and we had different interests growing up, but he'd recently bought a house with a secure 2-car garage and seemed genuinely enthusiastic about helping out. As a gesture of goodwill, I gave him money up front to cover any maintenance costs. "Don't worry about a thing," he assured me as I handed over the keys. "I'll treat her like my own." The first few months of deployment went as expected. Difficult, stressful, but manageable. Jake sent occasional photos of the Mustang, sometimes mentioning taking it for a short drive to keep the fluid circulating, which seemed reasonable. We texted regularly and he always responded quickly when I asked about the car. Around the 8-month mark, things changed. Jake's messages became less frequent, then stopped altogether. At first, I assumed he was just busy with work or family, but when 2 weeks passed without response, I grew concerned. I reached out to our parents who said they hadn't heard from him recently either, but assumed he was going through something. With communication options limited during deployment, I contacted my next-door neighbor back home, asking if he could drive by Jake's house to make sure everything was okay. His response chilled me to the bone. "Just checked. No Mustang in the driveway or garage. Jake was home but seemed nervous when I asked about you or the car." I spent the remainder of my deployment alternating between worry and anger. Had something happened to the car? Had Jake sold it? Was he in some kind of trouble? With limited connectivity and being thousands of miles away, there was little I could do but wait and stew. When I finally returned stateside, confronting Jake was my first priority. He avoided me for days, screening my calls and making excuses to our family about why he couldn't see me. When I finally cornered him at our parents' house, the truth came out. "I had to sell the car," he admitted, unable to meet my eyes. "I got into some financial trouble, and it was the only way out." "Financial trouble?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "What kind of financial trouble justifies selling something that doesn't belong to you?" Jake's financial trouble turned out to be gambling debts, tens of thousands of dollars owed to people you don't want to owe money to. He'd sold my grandfather's Mustang for $30,000 to someone who'd paid cash, no questions asked, knowing full well he was getting a steal. "I was desperate," Jake insisted. "These guys were threatening me, threatening Kate and the kids. I'm going to pay you back, I swear. Just give me some time." "How did you even sell it?" I demanded. "Your name isn't on the title." Jake looked away, and that's when I realized the extent of his betrayal. "You forged my signature, didn't you?" His silence was confirmation enough. I gave him one chance, 48 hours to tell me who bought the car and to contact them about buying it back. He claimed the buyer was unreachable, that he didn't have contact information anymore. More lies, as I would later discover. With that final betrayal, I went straight to the police and filed reports for grand theft auto and forgery. I brought all the documentation proving my ownership, including the original title, registration, and insurance papers. The police took it seriously. The car's value alone made it grand theft, and the forgery charges added another layer of criminality. The investigation revealed something even more disturbing. The detectives found that Jake had pulled similar scams with other family members, borrowing money he never repaid, borrowing and selling valuable items, even taking out a credit card in our mother's name. He'd managed to keep each victim isolated, playing on family loyalty to avoid legal consequences. "You don't understand what you're doing," Jake pleaded when he learned I wasn't dropping the charges. "This will destroy my life. What about Kate and the kids?" "You destroyed your own life," I told him. "You made these choices knowing what you were risking. Through the investigation, the police located the Mustang. The buyer, a classic car enthusiast named Steve, was initially resistant. He'd paid good money for the car, albeit well below market value, and had a bill of sale. When presented with evidence of Jake's fraud, however, he became more cooperative, especially when offered the choice between returning the car or potentially being charged with receiving stolen property. Steve and I eventually worked out an arrangement. I would reimburse him the $30,000 he'd paid, which nearly wiped out my deployment savings, and he would return the car. He'd taken decent care of it at least, though several original parts had been replaced with aftermarket alternatives that reduced its value and authenticity. Jake's case went to court. With multiple charges and victims, plus the forged documents, his attorney advised him to take a plea deal. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison for the various fraud and theft charges. The fallout extended beyond Jake's legal punishment. His wife Kate filed for divorce while he was awaiting sentencing, unable to forgive the deception and theft that had characterized their marriage. She was granted full custody of their children, with Jake limited to supervised visits upon release. Our extended family fractured into those who felt I should have handled it within the family, and those who recognized Jake's actions as the serious crimes they were. Our parents were caught in the middle, devastated by their son's betrayal, yet also pained by his imprisonment. They've maintained contact with Jake and visit him regularly, though our mother confessed she can no longer trust him the way she once did. The Mustang sits in my garage now, fully restored once again to its original glory. Sometimes when I work on it, I still hear my grandfather's voice guiding my hands. The car represents something different now, not just the bond between a grandfather and grandson, but a hard lesson about trust and accountability. Jake was released after serving 2 years of his sentence. He's tried to reconnect, claiming prison changed him, but some bridges can't be rebuilt. I don't hate him anymore, but I don't trust him either. Actions have consequences, and some betrayals leave permanent damage. The irony isn't lost on me that Jake sold the Mustang to avoid threats from his gambling creditors, only to lose everything anyway. His freedom, his marriage, his relationship with his children, his family's trust. Had he simply asked for help instead of stealing, things might have turned out very differently. I might even have sold the car voluntarily to help him protect his family, had I known the full situation. That's the thing about deception. It rarely leads where you think it will. Jake thought he was solving a problem by selling my car. Instead, he created a much bigger one that ultimately cost him everything. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from. The final story might be the most satisfying revenge yet. I never imagined I'd become the star of my own personal horror movie, but that's exactly what happened when I rented that one-bedroom apartment on Maple Street. It seemed perfect at first. Affordable, close to work, newly renovated. The landlord, Mr. Perkins, lived in the building and handled all maintenance himself, which he assured me meant prompt service and personal attention. Little did I know just how personal that attention would become. I'd been living there about 3 months when I started noticing small things out of place. At first it was easy to dismiss. Maybe I'd left that book on the coffee table instead of the shelf, or perhaps I hadn't closed my dresser drawer completely. But then the incidents became more obvious. My toiletries rearranged in the bathroom, food in my fridge that seemed to have been moved, the distinct feeling that someone had sat in my desk chair. I'm not naturally paranoid, but these little inconsistencies started adding up. I began taking mental inventory of my apartment each morning, before leaving for work, making notes on my phone of exactly how things were positioned. Within a week, my suspicions were confirmed. Someone was definitely entering my apartment while I was gone. The logical first step was to talk to Mr. Perkins. I caught him in the hallway one evening, casually mentioning that I'd noticed signs someone had been in my apartment. "Has there been maintenance I wasn't informed about?" I asked, giving him an easy out. "Absolutely not," he replied, looking appropriately concerned. I never enter tenants' units without giving 24-hour written notice. It's the law. He suggested I might be misremembering where I'd placed things, or that perhaps the building's occasional settling might have shifted items. He even offered to change my locks if it would make me feel safer. That won't be necessary, I said. I'm probably just being paranoid. But I wasn't being paranoid, and I knew it. That night, I ordered a hidden camera disguised as a smoke detector from Amazon, paying extra for next day delivery. It was motion activated, with night vision capabilities and cloud storage for the footage. The next evening, I installed it in my living room, positioning it to capture most of the apartment, including the entrance to my bedroom. The first alert came to my phone at 10:17 a.m. the following day, about an hour after I'd left for work. I waited until my lunch break to check the footage, expecting perhaps to see my cat knocking things over. I didn't have a cat, or maybe some bizarre explanation like a window draft, moving papers around. My windows were sealed shut. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. Mr. Perkins, using his master key, casually let himself into my apartment. He wasn't there to fix anything or check on maintenance issues. He walked around like he owned the place, which technically he did, but that doesn't grant unfettered access to occupied units. He opened my refrigerator, helped himself to a beer, then wandered into my bedroom. The camera couldn't see what happened next, but when he emerged 20 minutes later, he was wearing one of my hoodies. My hoodie. He sat on my couch, drank my beer, and watched my TV for almost an hour before returning the hoodie to my bedroom and leaving as nonchalantly as he'd arrived. I felt violated in a way that's hard to describe. A stranger had been making himself at home in my space, touching my things, wearing my clothes. I wanted to confront him immediately, but something told me to wait and see if this was a one-time thing or a pattern. It was definitely a pattern. Over the next 3 days, Mr. Perkins entered my apartment each morning after I left. His activities escalated from merely looking around to using my shower, napping in my bed, and going through my personal papers. I documented everything, downloading and backing up all footage, feeling increasingly sick to my stomach with each new violation. Then came the breaking point. On day 4, Mr. Perkins brought friends, 2 other men I didn't recognize. I watched in horror as he gave them a tour of my apartment, opening drawers, showing them my belongings, all while they laughed and commented. The absolute worst moment came when he found my journal in my nightstand drawer and began reading entries aloud to his friends, all 3 of them mocking my private thoughts and feelings. That night, I couldn't sleep. The idea that these strangers had been in my space, touching my things, invading my privacy at the most intimate level, it made my skin crawl. I decided it was time to take action, but I wanted to be smart about it. The next morning, instead of confronting Mr. Perkins directly, I called a lawyer who specialized in tenant rights. After explaining the situation and showing her some of the footage, her response was immediate and unequivocal. This is highly illegal. He's committing criminal trespass, invasion of privacy, and potentially theft if he's consumed your food or beverages. The unauthorized entry alone is grounds for significant damages, but the pattern of behavior and bringing others into your home elevates this considerably. On her advice, I continued documenting the intrusions for 2 more weeks. Mr. Perkins entered my apartment 13 more times, each visit captured in crystal clear video. Some visits were brief, just him walking through and checking things out. Others were extended stays where he would use my shower, sleep in my bed, or watch my TV. Twice more, he brought friends to gawk at my personal space. With a solid body of evidence assembled, my lawyer and I moved forward on 2 fronts simultaneously: a police report for criminal trespassing and invasion of privacy, and a civil lawsuit for damages. The police were immediately concerned, especially when they saw the footage of Mr. Perkins reading my journal aloud to his friends. They interviewed him that same day. According to the officer who followed up with me, Mr. Perkins initially denied everything. then claimed he was just checking on the property when confronted with the existence of video evidence. When actually shown the footage of himself trying on my clothes and sleeping in my bed, he reportedly went pale and refused to speak further without an attorney. The criminal case moved relatively quickly. Mr. Perkins was charged with multiple counts of criminal trespassing, invasion of privacy, and one count of petty theft for the beers. He eventually accepted a plea deal that included probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. The civil case took longer but ended even more satisfyingly. My lawyer argued that the repeated violations, combined with the humiliation of having my private journal read to strangers, constituted severe emotional distress and warranted significant damages. The evidence was overwhelming, and Mr. Perkins' attorney knew it. After some back and forth, we settled for $150,000 in damages. That would have been victory enough, but the ripple effects continued. The State Housing Authority revoked Mr. Perkins' property management license. The local paper ran a story about the case, effectively destroying his reputation in our small town. Most landlords can shake off bad reviews or minor complaints, but repeatedly broke into tenants' apartment to try on their clothes and read their diary to his friends is not something people forget easily. The final, most satisfying consequence came about 6 months later. I'd long since moved to a new apartment with a female landlord who lived in another state and employed a professional property management company. I heard through a former neighbor that Mr. Perkins had been forced to sell the building to pay my settlement and his legal fees. The new owner's first act, installing security cameras in all common areas and electronic locks that record every entry and exit. Apparently, I wasn't the only tenant Mr. Perkins had been checking in on. I still have trust issues when it comes to living in rental properties. I've installed my own security cameras in every apartment since then, and I'm hyper-vigilant about noticing if things have been moved. But there's also a sense of empowerment that came from fighting back and winning, from refusing to let someone violate my boundaries without consequences. Sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate or complicated. Sometimes it's just shining a bright, unforgiving light on someone's actions and letting them face the natural consequences of what they've done. Mr. Perkins thought he was entitled to access my private space whenever he wanted. In the end, that entitlement cost him his property, his livelihood, his reputation, and his freedom. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember that sometimes the best revenge is simply exposing the truth. If you enjoyed these Reddit tales of justice served, hit subscribe for more stories next week, and tell me in the comments which revenge was your favorite.